It is a shame that my daughter has millions in the bank but can't find $45,000 to help her own blood. She is too selfish to help this family." 200 people went silent. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Sweet tea glasses paused midair. The fellowship hall at Grace Chapel smelled like fried chicken and fresh rolls, and the jasmine centerpieces the women's ministry had arranged that morning, and every bit of warmth in that room evaporated the second my mother opened her mouth. I didn't flinch. I didn't push back from the table. I didn't even set down my fork. I kept my eyes on the plate in front of me, on the coleslaw I'd barely touched and the drumstick going cold beside it, and I let the silence do what silence does best. It told the truth about everyone in the room. Barbara Thornton stood at the front of the fellowship hall in her lavender dress and her pearl earrings, Bible pressed to her chest like a shield, and she wasn't done. She had the microphone. She had the stage. And she had 10 years of resentment to pour into every syllable. "I'm not asking for pity," she said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "I'm asking for prayer. My son Wade has the opportunity of a lifetime, a real partnership, a chance to build something honest, and his own sister won't lift a finger." She paused. Let the words settle like dust on the white tablecloths. "Pray for our family. Pray that Cecilia finds her heart again, because the girl I raised wouldn't have turned her back on blood." She sat down, smoothed her skirt, folded her hands on the table like she'd just finished reciting the Beatitudes. If you've ever had a family member use a room full of people to make you the villain, hit that like button and subscribe. Because this story is just getting started. My name is Cecilia Thornton. I'm 40 years old. I own Thornton Interiors, a high-end design studio in Greenville, South Carolina. I'm a widow. My husband James died 5 years ago in a construction accident, and I've spent every day since then building a life for our daughter Lily that he'd be proud of. And for 10 years, I've been the single largest anonymous donor Grace Chapel has ever had. But I need to go back. Because what happened at that fellowship lunch on October 12th didn't start that Sunday. It started a decade ago when I made my first silent deposit into the church's donor-advised fund, and my mother decided that my success was something she was owed. When James was alive, the studio was just getting off the ground. We were doing well, not wealthy, but comfortable. James worked construction, brought in a solid income, and I was landing my first few high-end residential clients. We lived modestly, drove used cars, put money away when we could. And 10 years ago, when the studio turned its first real profit, I set up the donor-advised fund. Then James died. The life insurance payout was substantial. I won't say the exact number because it doesn't matter for this part. What matters is what I did with it. I didn't buy a bigger house. I didn't take a vacation. I sat at my kitchen table the night after his funeral, Lily asleep in the next room, and I built a plan. I put the bulk of it into a trust for Lily's education. I reinvested in the studio. And I set up a donor-advised fund through a financial advisor James and I had used together, a fund with what the paperwork called a final say clause, meaning every dollar that left that fund required my signature, my approval, and my direction. No one else's. The first thing I funded was the church. I started with $4,800 a year, $400 a month, deposited anonymously through the fund. It wasn't a tithe in the traditional sense. It was more than that. It was my way of honoring James, who'd grown up at Grace Chapel, who'd been baptized in that building, who'd proposed to me in the parking lot after Wednesday night service. No one knew. That was the point. I didn't want the attention. I didn't want the praise. I wanted the church to have what it needed, and I wanted to do it quietly. Over time, the giving grew. When the youth center's roof started leaking and the building committee said they were $22,500 short of the renovation budget, I wrote the check. Directly to the contractors. No announcement, no plaque. Pastor Miller knew because the fund required a church liaison for tax purposes, but he honored the anonymity clause without question. Then came the mortgage. 3 years into the fund, my parents hit a rough stretch. Dad's hours at the plant got cut. Mom's part-time work at the church office didn't cover much. They fell behind on their tithing, which in their circle meant they fell behind on their standing, and then they fell behind on the mortgage. Mom never asked me for help. She didn't have to. I saw the late notices when I stopped by to pick up Lily after a weekend visit. They were tucked under the phone book on the kitchen counter, and Mom didn't know I'd seen them. I set up a $1,200 monthly transfer, not to my parents, to their mortgage servicer, routed through a third-party payment arrangement so it would look like a bank recalculation. Mom told the ladies at Bible study that the bank had adjusted their interest rate. She told them God had provided. She never knew it was me. $1,200 a month for 24 months. That's $28,800. Add the annual tithes. $4,800 a year for 10 years. That's $48,000. Add the youth center renovation. $22,500. The total, documented to the penny in the church's donor ledger, was $99,300. And during all of it, every Sunday, every Wednesday, every fellowship lunch and Easter brunch and Christmas cantata, my mother told anyone who would listen that I was the black sheep, the one who only cared about money, the one who'd rather build her little business than show up for family. She said it with a laugh sometimes. "Oh, Cecilia's too busy for us. You know how she is, always working." Other times it was sharper. "She has more than enough. She just doesn't have the heart to share." I swallowed it. Every time. I told myself this was simply what family did. You absorb. You adapt. You keep giving because giving is who you are, not because anyone thanks you for it. Then there was Wade. My brother is 6 years younger than me. He's 34. And in 34 years, Wade Thornton has started 4 businesses, finished 0, and burned through every dollar that's ever crossed his path. There was the car detailing company when he was 23, gone in 7 months. A food truck venture at 26. The truck itself got repossessed. A vape shop at 29 that lasted exactly long enough for the lease penalty to hit. And then the landscaping company 2 years ago, which ended with Wade owing $14,000 to an equipment rental company and our mother calling me at 11 at night to ask if I could help smooth things over. I paid the $14,000. I told myself it was the last time. Wade married Sarah 3 years ago. Sarah came from a family that looked successful from the outside, but ran on credit and appearances. She fit right in. Within months, she was wearing designer sunglasses to Wednesday night service and telling people that Wade was an entrepreneur with multiple ventures in development. What Wade had was a couch and a PlayStation, and a wife who believed that proximity to my success meant she was entitled to a share of it. The latest scheme was a truck dealership. A man named Darren Wilson, a deacon at Grace Chapel, had offered Wade a junior partnership in his pre-owned truck lot on the south side of Greenville. The buy-in was $45,000. Wade didn't have $45,000. Wade didn't have $4,500. But he had a mother willing to make his problem everyone else's. And he had a sister with a bank account he treated like a personal line of credit. The ask came 3 weeks before the fellowship lunch. Mom called on a Tuesday evening. I was reviewing fabric samples for a client's lake house. Lily was at the kitchen table doing long division. "Cecilia, your brother needs $45,000. Not, could you help? Not, would you consider?" She stated it like a line item on an invoice. I kept my voice steady. "For what?" "Darren Wilson is giving him a chance. A real business. Not like those other things. This is established. This is real." "Mom, Wade has failed at 4 businesses in 10 years. That's a terrible thing to say about your brother. It's a true thing to say about my brother." Silence. Then the shift. The tone she uses when sweetness stops working and scripture becomes a weapon. "Your father and I didn't raise you to be selfish, Cecilia. James wouldn't have wanted this." I felt my jaw tighten. I kept my hand flat on the table. Lily looked up from her homework. "I didn't say I couldn't give Wade the money, Mother. I said I wouldn't. There is a difference." She hung up without another word. 3 weeks passed. I assumed it was over. I was wrong. The Sunday of the fellowship lunch was one of those bright October days in Greenville where the light comes through the chapel windows like honey and the parking lot smells like pine and cooling asphalt. 200 people filled the fellowship hall for the quarterly lunch after service. Long tables, paper plates, fried chicken from Mabel Harris's kitchen, banana pudding and sweet tea, and rolls that Wade's own children were already tearing apart before the blessing was finished. Lily sat beside me. She wore her yellow sundress with the white daisies. She'd been quiet all morning, quieter than usual. I noticed but didn't press. I figured she was tired. I didn't know yet what had happened at the youth event the night before. The meal went the way these meals always go, chatter and laughter and styrofoam plates bending under the weight of too many sides. Pastor Miller said the blessing. People ate. Kids ran between tables. The AC hummed overhead. Then my mother stood up. She walked to the front of the room, and Deacon Harris handed her the microphone without question. Barbara Thornton was a fixture at Grace Chapel. She ran the prayer chain. She organized the food pantry. She sat in the third pew every Sunday and sang every hymn from memory. When she asked for the microphone, people gave it to her. She started with a smile. She always starts with a smile. "I want to ask for a prayer request," she said. "Not for me, for my family." The room settled. People turned to listen. This was normal. This was what fellowship lunches were for. My son Wade has been given a wonderful opportunity, a chance to partner with one of our own deacons in an honest business, but he needs help. He needs family to step up. She paused. Her eyes found me across the room. I was already still. I was already quiet. I knew what was coming, the way you know a storm is close when the air changes. "It is a shame that my daughter has millions in the bank, but can't find $45,000 to help her own blood. She is too selfish to help this family." The room didn't gasp. It went vacuum sealed, the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums. She wasn't finished. "You're a disgrace to your father's memory, Cecilia. He'd be disgusted to see what a cold, greedy woman you've become." She said my dead husband's legacy was shame. She said it into a microphone, in front of 200 people, in the church where he was baptized. I set my fork down. I folded my napkin. I placed both hands flat on the table. And then I felt a small hand close around my wrist. "Lily." Her fingers were trembling. Her eyes were red and glassy, and I realized she'd been crying before the speech even started. She'd been crying since we sat down. "Mom," she whispered. Her voice cracked right down the middle. "Is it true what they said?" "What who said, baby?" "Cole and Madison, last night at youth group. They said Grandma told them you're a greedy miser." Her chin quivered. "They said Daddy would be ashamed of you." Something inside me snapped. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a clean, quiet break. Like a thread pulled taut for 10 years finally giving way in perfect silence. I looked at my daughter. I looked at the tears on her face. I looked at the room full of people staring at me like I was the problem. And I was done pretending this was okay. I pulled Lily close, pressed my lips to the top of her head, held her there for 3 full seconds while 200 people watched and waited for me to crumble. I didn't crumble. I sat up straight. I kept my hand steady. I looked at my mother, who was still standing at the front of the room with the microphone loose in her hand, chin tilted up, waiting for the apology she trained me to deliver for 40 years. I didn't deliver it. I didn't say a word. Instead, I heard a chair push back. Not mine, not Wade's, not my mother's. Pastor Arthur Miller stood up from the far end of the head table. He was 68 years old, had led Grace Chapel for 31 years, and in all that time, I had never once seen him interrupt a fellowship lunch. He moved slowly, deliberately, the way a man moves when he's made a decision he knows will change the temperature of a room permanently. He didn't reach for the microphone. He didn't need to. His voice carried the way it always did, steady and low, the kind of voice that made 200 people stop breathing. "Barbara," he said, "sit down." My mother blinked. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Sit down," he said again. "Please." She sat. The microphone clattered against the edge of the table. Wade, 2 seats to her left, shifted in his chair. Sarah put a hand on Wade's arm. My father stared at his plate. Pastor Miller walked to the small office behind the fellowship hall kitchen. He was gone for less than a minute. When he came back, he was carrying a leather-bound ledger, dark brown, cracked at the spine, the kind of book that looks like it's held more truth than it was ever meant to carry. He set it on the table at the front of the room. He opened it carefully. He turned to a page marked with a blue ribbon. "I have served this church for 31 years, he said. "In that time, I have honored every request for anonymity that any donor has ever made. I consider it sacred. I consider it part of my calling." He looked directly at my mother. But I will not stand in this room and allow the character of a good woman to be destroyed by someone who has never once asked where the money comes from. The room didn't move. Barbara, you run the prayer chain. You organize the food pantry. You sit in the third pew and you sing every hymn from memory. And for 10 years you have told this congregation that your daughter is selfish, that she doesn't give, that she doesn't care. He placed his finger on the open page. For 10 years, a single anonymous donor has given this church $4,800 every year, $400 a month, deposited through a private donor-advised fund. That totals $48,000. He turned a page. When the youth center roof failed and we were $22,500 short of the renovation budget, the same donor wrote a check directly to the contractors. No announcement, no plaque, no recognition requested. He turned another page. That's $70,500. The room had gone so still I could hear the ice shifting in the sweet tea pitcher 3 tables away. Pastor Miller closed the ledger. He didn't need it anymore. He knew the numbers the way he knew Scripture, by heart. There is an additional $28,800 in documented transfers that I became aware of only recently, payments made to a mortgage servicer on behalf of a family in this congregation. Payments routed through a third-party arrangement so they would appear as a bank adjustment. He paused. The total documented giving from this single donor over 10 years is $99,300. He looked at my mother. Then he looked at me. Then he looked back at my mother. Barbara, for 10 years, this selfish woman has paid for the roof over your head and the very bread on this table. The ledger doesn't lie. 200 people turned to look at me. I didn't stand up. I didn't nod. I didn't smile. I kept my hand on Lily's back and I kept my eyes on Pastor Miller, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, nothing. Just the clean, sharp clarity of a truth that had waited 10 years to breathe. My mother's face went white, not red. White. The blood drained from her cheeks like someone had pulled a plug. Her mouth moved twice before sound came out. That's not... Arthur, that information is confidential. It was, he said, until you used this microphone to publicly assassinate the character of the very person keeping this church alive. I won't protect anonymity that's being weaponized, Barbara. Not in God's house. Wade was on his feet. His chair scraped back hard against the linoleum. Sarah grabbed his arm, but he shook her off. This is insane, Wade said. His voice was loud, cracking at the edges. You're taking her side? She's the one who won't help family. She's sitting on millions and she won't give me $45,000 for a legitimate business. Pastor Miller turned to him with the patience of a man who had watched too many young men mistake volume for authority. Wade, your sister has given this church and this family $99,300 in 10 years. She did it without a single word, without a single acknowledgement. And your mother just stood in front of 200 people and called her selfish. Wade's mouth opened, closed, opened again. That's church money. That's different. I'm talking about family. She paid your parents' mortgage for 2 years, son. $1,200 a month. Your mother thought the bank adjusted her interest rate. Wade looked at Barbara. Barbara looked at the table. My father hadn't moved. His hands were still folded in his lap, his eyes fixed on his plate, his silence doing what it had always done. Granting permission, Sarah leaned over and whispered something sharp in Wade's ear. Wade's jaw tightened. He sat down hard. The room stayed frozen. 200 people. Paper plates and banana pudding and fried chicken going cold under the fluorescent lights. And the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the faint rustle of Pastor Miller closing the ledger. I stood up, slowly. I took Lily's hand. She held on tight. Her small fingers wrapped around mine, and she didn't look at anyone except me. I picked up my purse from the back of my chair. I pushed the chair in. I walked toward the door. My mother's voice caught me at the threshold. Cecilia Ann, don't you dare walk out of here. I stopped. I turned. I looked at her across the room, across the tables and the plates and the 20 years of silence I'd swallowed to keep this family intact. I'm not the family bank anymore, I said. My voice didn't waver. It didn't rise. I'm just a mother who doesn't have to pretend for you. I walked out. Lily walked beside me. The door to the fellowship hall closed behind us with a soft click, not a slam, just the quiet sound of a latch settling into place. The October sun hit us as we crossed the parking lot. Warm, bright, pine and cooling asphalt. Lily's hand was still in mine. "Mom," she said. "Yeah, baby." "Are you okay?" "I'm okay." "Are we coming back?" I opened the car door for her, waited until she climbed in and buckled her seatbelt, closed the door gently. "No," I said. "We're not." The engine started with a low, steady hum. I pulled out of the parking lot without looking back. Grace Chapel shrank in the rearview mirror until the steeple was just a white line against the blue October sky. At exactly 4:12 p.m., I was sitting at my kitchen table. Lily was on the couch in the next room, watching a movie, wrapped in the quilt James's mother had made for her the year she was born. The house was quiet except for the low murmur of the television and the click of my phone screen unlocking. I opened the banking app. I navigated to recurring transfers. The screen loaded slowly, the way it always does on Sundays, when everyone in the country is checking their accounts at the same time. The transfer was listed third from the top, $1,200. Monthly, auto pay. Recipient, Greenville Mortgage Services, account ending in 4471. Active for 24 months. I tapped the transfer. The options appeared. Edit. Pause. Cancel. I tapped cancel. A confirmation window appeared. "Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring transfer of $1,200 per month?" I tapped confirm. The screen refreshed. The transfer line disappeared. 24 months of invisible support, $28,800 in payments my mother never knew about, erased in 2 taps. I scrolled down. The donor-advised fund contribution was next. $400 monthly. Grace Chapel, anonymous. Active for 10 years. I tapped cancel. Confirm. Gone. I set the phone down on the kitchen table. The screen went dark. The house was still. I could hear Lily laughing softly at something in the movie, and outside the window, the oak in the front yard was dropping its first October leaves onto the lawn in slow, quiet spirals. I opened my contacts. I scrolled to Mom. I tapped the name. I selected block this caller, then Wade, block, then Sarah, block. Then the family group text, the one called Thornton Family, the one where Mom posted scripture every morning and Wade posted nothing, and Sarah posted photos of things they couldn't afford. I left the group. I deleted the thread. I set the phone face down on the table. My phone buzzed once against the wood, then again, then a third time. Then it was vibrating in a steady, unbroken rhythm like an angry hornet trapped in a jar. I didn't flip it over. I didn't check the screen. I knew exactly who it was. I knew exactly what they wanted. I stood up. I walked to the couch. I sat down next to Lily. She leaned into me without looking away from the screen, the way she always does, automatic and trusting, her head finding the hollow of my shoulder like it was made for her. I pulled the quilt over both of us. "Mom?" "Yeah. I'm glad we don't have to pretend anymore." I kissed the top of her head. I closed my eyes. The phone buzzed on the kitchen table. It buzzed and buzzed and buzzed. I didn't answer. The buzzing stopped eventually, not because they gave up, because blocked numbers don't ring through more than once before the system swallows them. By Monday morning, the silence in our house wasn't heavy anymore. It was sharp. It was clear. It was the first real peace we'd had in years. I made Lily scrambled eggs and toast. She ate every bite. She talked about a book she was reading for school, something about a girl who sails across the Pacific, and her eyes were bright and her voice was steady, and she didn't mention Grace Chapel or her grandmother or her cousins once. I dropped her at school at 7:45. I drove to the studio. I opened the door, turned on the lights, brewed coffee, and sat down at my drafting table with fabric swatches for the Henderson Lake House project. And for the first time in 10 years, I worked an entire morning without a knot in my stomach. No calls to dread, no guilt hovering at the edge of every task, no mental arithmetic calculating how much I'd need to set aside for the next crisis that wasn't mine. I didn't seek out the information that followed. I didn't ask. I didn't search. But Greenville is a small city, and Grace Chapel is a smaller world. And when a family collapses in a community that tight, the details travel whether you want them to or not. The first thing that fell was the dealership. On Monday morning at approximately 9:15 a.m., Darren Wilson called Wade Thornton and rescinded the partnership offer. I learned this 3 days later from a client whose husband attended the same men's Bible study as Darren. The conversation lasted less than 4 minutes. Darren told Wade that after what happened at the fellowship lunch, he couldn't in good conscience attach his name or his business to the Thornton family. He said the word character twice. He said the word trust once. And then he hung up. The $450,000 partnership evaporated before Wade had finished his morning coffee. Wade called Darren back 6 times that day. Darren didn't answer. On Tuesday, Wade drove to the lot in person. Darren's manager met him in the parking lot and told him Darren wasn't available. Wade sat in his truck for 45 minutes. Then he left. 3 weeks passed. The meal train stopped. Not officially. No one sent an email or made an announcement. The women who had been bringing casseroles and soup and fresh bread to my parents' house every other Thursday, the rotation that Barbara had organized herself when she first told the congregation about Dad's reduced hours, simply stopped signing up. The online schedule sat empty. No names, no dishes, no visits. Barbara called the church office on a Wednesday morning to ask about the gap. The woman who answered, a volunteer named Jean Thomas, told her that participation in the meal train was voluntary and that she'd send a reminder to the sign-up list. No one signed up. I didn't learn this from Jean. I learned it from Pastor Miller, who called me once, 5 weeks after the fellowship lunch, not to persuade me to come back, not to mediate, but to tell me he was praying for Lily and to ask if I'd found a new church home. I told him we were visiting a congregation on the west side of town. He said that was good. He said Lily deserved a place where she could sit in a pew without being used as a weapon. Before he hung up, he mentioned, almost as an aside, that Barbara had stopped attending services. He said she told the women's ministry leader that she was taking a break for health reasons. He said the parking lot felt different on Sundays. That was all he said. I didn't ask for more. The mortgage was the next thing. The $1,200 monthly transfer had been keeping my parents' heads above water for 2 years. They didn't know that. My mother believed the bank had recalculated their rate, that God had provided, that the numbers just worked out. When the November payment came due and the full amount hit for the first time, she called the mortgage company. They told her there had been no rate adjustment. There had been an external payment arrangement that had recently been canceled. She didn't call me. She couldn't. I was blocked on her phone just as she was blocked on mine. But the math was simple and the math was brutal. Without $1,200 a month in invisible support, the mortgage was $1,200 a month too expensive. Dad picked up extra shifts at the plant. He was 66 years old and he picked up extra shifts. Mom applied for a part-time position at a grocery store on Lawrence Road. She'd never worked retail in her life. She got the job. She stocked dairy shelves 3 mornings a week, starting at 5 a.m. By February, 4 months after the fellowship lunch, they listed the house. The house where James proposed to me in the backyard. The house where Lily took her first steps on the kitchen tile. They listed it for $189,000, which was $11,000 less than they owed, and it sat on the market for 6 weeks before a young couple offered $174,500. My parents took the loss. They moved into a 2-bedroom rental on Cedar Street, a narrow unit with shared laundry in the basement and a parking lot that smelled like hot asphalt in the afternoons. Mom hung her cross-stitch sampler in the living room, the one that said, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." And she put the pearl earrings in a drawer and didn't wear them again. Wade and Sarah's unraveling was quieter, but steeper. Without the dealership, Wade had no income and no prospects. His resume was a graveyard of failed ventures: the detailing company, the food truck, the vape shop, the landscaping business. No employer in Greenville's automotive industry would touch him after Darren Wilson's name stopped being attached to his. Sarah went back to work. She took a position as a receptionist at a dental office on Pleasantburg Drive, answering phones for $16.50 an hour. The designer sunglasses disappeared. The posts on social media slowed, then stopped entirely. Their lease on the 3-bedroom house in the Verdi development came up for renewal in January, and they didn't renew. They moved into a smaller unit closer to Wade's parents. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. A shared wall with a neighbor who played television too loud at night. Wade took a job stocking shelves at a home improvement store on Woodruff Road. Night shifts, $14.75 an hour. He started at 10 p.m. and finished at 6:30 a.m., and he came home smelling like concrete dust and shrink wrap. I heard this from no one in particular and everyone at once. Greenville talked. Greenville always talked. And the story that traveled wasn't the one Barbara had spent 10 years crafting. It was the one Pastor Miller had told in 30 seconds with a leather-bound ledger and a steady voice. The woman who gave $99,300 and never said a word. The mother who called her selfish in front of 200 people. The brother who wanted $45,000 he'd never earn back. That was the story Greenville told, and Greenville didn't forget. 6 new clients contacted Thornton Interiors in the 2 months following the fellowship lunch. Every single one of them attended Grace Chapel. Every single one of them mentioned, quietly, carefully, that they'd heard what happened and they wanted to support a business run by someone with integrity. I didn't ask for their business. I didn't advertise. I didn't post a single word about what happened on any platform. They came to me. Because the ledger didn't lie, and neither did the silence I kept for a decade. 1 year later, everything had changed. Lily turned 10 in August. We celebrated at the house, the one I'd bought 6 months earlier, a Cape Cod with a fenced yard and a magnolia tree, and a bedroom I'd let Lily paint lavender because she said it reminded her of the sky right before the stars come out. She had 4 friends over. They ate cake and ran through the sprinkler and caught fireflies in mason jars until the streetlights came on. She made honor roll every quarter that year. She joined the art club at her new school. She laughed more. She slept through the night without waking up to check if I was still there, which she'd been doing for years without telling me. We found a church. A small one, west side of town, no fellowship hall, no microphone, no quarterly lunch, just a pastor who preached short sermons and a congregation that didn't keep score. Lily sang in the children's choir. She stood in the front row and she sang without looking over her shoulder. On a Saturday in late September, almost exactly a year after the fellowship lunch, I took Lily to the park across the street from the new church. She brought the designer doll I'd given her for her birthday, the one with the hand-painted face and the linen dress, and she sat on a blanket under the magnolia trees and told me about a story she was writing for English class. "It's about a woman who builds a house," she said, "but not with wood, with decisions." I smiled. "That sounds like a good story." "It's based on someone I know," she said. She didn't look up from the doll's hair, which she was braiding with careful, precise fingers. My phone sat in my purse on the blanket. Do not disturb. No notifications, no buzzing, no blocked numbers trying to find a way through. I leaned back on my hands and watched the light come through the magnolia leaves and listened to my daughter tell me about the house made of decisions. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not triumph, not vindication, not satisfaction, peace. Just peace. The kind that doesn't come from winning, the kind that comes from stopping. From setting the weight down and realizing your hands still work, your back still straightens, and the person sitting next to you on the blanket is the only legacy that matters. Some doors close so better ones can open. I never regretted a single second of it. If you enjoyed this story about protecting your children and knowing your worth, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.